The year is 1747, and the Emperor Qianlong has published a new edict against cheating in the imperial examination. Armed guards will police the exam halls. All candidates will be searched and their possessions and clothing meticulously examined. Over 40 candidates were found to have crib sheets or other devices for cheating about their persons. Cheating materials were hidden in their brushes, in the inkstones they were to use, in candles, or inside the food they brought with them. Some even had passages of text copied onto their underclothes. A relatively common method for those who would seek any advantage to attain the great prizes on offer. As the imperial examination system became more open and the rewards on offer more extravagant, the pressure to succeed became even more intense. The Song had introduced anonymized papers early in their dynasty's reign to ensure impartiality on the part of those marking.
历朝历代无不在防范科举作弊、杜绝制度漏洞方面大费周章，尤其是到了宋初，随着一系列防备措施的出台，科举制度日趋严明。可以说，科举正是在历代王朝累次修订和逐步完善之下，才形成一整套成熟完备的制度体系。
The Song were the first to use a purpose-built examination compound, where all candidates were isolated in their own individual cells. Later, under the Ming Dynasty, the same type of exam compound was built in every province. The compounds had watchtowers and high surrounding walls. The examinees were shut in their separate cells for the whole duration of the exam, which could be up to 3 days. No communication was allowed. If a candidate died during the exam, His body was wrapped in cloth and tossed over the wall. August 1673, under the reign of Emperor Kang Shi of the Qing dynasty. In the examination compound of Nanjing, one of the candidates is warily eyeing the invigilating officer. When he's sure the coast is clear, he unbuttons his robe. Underneath is a garment he had prepared specially for his exams, a crib shirt.
夹带是指被考生偷偷带了考场作弊的书籍和文章，也称回夹。马步坎肩是其中一种。唐代科举考试允许考生带参考书入场，宋代开始严禁夹带。
Crib notes might be written on rice paper, then rolled up and hidden inside the handle of a writing brush, the bottom of the inkstone, or secreted between layers of clothing, in hats or in shoes. Instead of plain ink, some cribs were written in juice or sap taken from plants. Invisible when dry, the text reappeared when the cloth or paper became wet. The Song dynasty, who had introduced the anonymous marking system, also had candidates thoroughly searched before allowing them into the exam compound. If any crib materials were found, the candidate would be automatically disqualified on the spot and have any previous qualifications annulled. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, the security check became even more stringent. Candidates were not allowed to wear clothing or headdresses with a lining. Even the food they brought with them had to be cut open for inspection. Despite all this, there were always some willing to take a risk. Bribing the officers responsible for the security check was one common expedient. In the early Qing dynasty, one candidate, the grandson of a famous scholar, lifted his shirt at the inspection, slapped his stomach, and announced, "It's all in here." The baffled guard admitted him without a search.
"除夹带外，枪击也是一种常用的作弊手段。枪击即代考，是指请有才华的人带着考卷。晚唐诗人温庭筠就是历史上非常有名的枪击高手。
Wen Tingyun took the Imperial examination many times, but never passed. However, with his extraordinary talent for poetry and vast exam experience, he was much in demand to help others cheat. He was supposed to be able to finish a paper in rhyming couplets in just a few minutes. Entering the exam hall one day, he was spotted by an invigilator who had heard of his reputation. The invigilator had Wen sit where he could keep a close eye on him. After one glance at the examination paper, Wen Tingyun started writing at amazing speed. He finished quickly, got up, and left. Only later was it discovered that Wen had actually completed papers for 8 other candidates. Such virtuosity inevitably won him even more admirers, despite its dubious purpose.
由于唐代科举出身，科场纪律松弛，因而呢，腔体十分活跃。温庭筠带人作卷也就不足为奇了。宋代科场渐渐严格，腔体一经发现，必处于严惩，不仅要各取功名，还要发配充阅。明清两朝则更严，甚至有腔体被处死的例子。
To prevent ringers from sitting the exams, identity checks became necessary. In the Song dynasty, each examinee was issued a license, which carried precise details of the examinee's physical characteristics. Another measure required every candidate to find other candidates who were willing to vouch for him. Those who vouched for each other would be considered a group. If anyone in the group were found cheating, the whole group would be considered guilty by association and disbarred permanently. This form of self-policing was an effective extension of other forms of self-policing and collective punishment that had been practiced in Chinese society.
除夹带枪体之外，常见的作弊手段还有关键，即用金钱贿赂买通考官，以徇私舞弊。唐代科举留有举荐制遗风，因而科场关禁盛行。 到宋代，随着一系列防备措施的出台，关禁之辈受到严厉打击。
From the Song dynasty, when the examination began, the compound gates would be locked and nobody was allowed to leave or enter until the exam was over. It meant both the invigilators and the examinees would be isolated from the outside world for a few days. When the examination was over, the invigilators would seal up the papers immediately. Then the papers would be delivered to a special office where the examinee's name, birthplace, and family background would be covered before being sent to the evaluators. In 1053 AD, Zheng Xie, a young man from Anzhou, sat the metropolitan examination. When the results were announced, he was placed 5th. Rather confident in his own talent, he wrote a letter to the chief examiner to complain that he hadn't been placed higher. Irritated in the extreme, the chief examiner decided to punish him by failing him in the palace exam. However, since the candidates' identities were concealed, he ended up failing another candidate, and Jung passed with a top score. Not exactly proof of the fairness of the system, but certainly proof that the anonymization process could work.
密封制度的实行，杜绝了考官以私人恩怨来左右其实的弊端，是用来保障科举取士的公平和公正。
However, the covering of names was soon seen as not sufficient. A candidate could quite easily be identified by their calligraphy. To an experienced eye, the brushwork of their writing style might distinguish a candidate as clearly as his face. Therefore, in 1015 AD, the emperor decided that all the completed examination papers should be transcribed by clerks in red ink. If there was any error in the transcription, corrections were to be made with yellow ink. Only then would the papers be delivered to the markers.
梅封或誊录制度的实施，使阅卷官不仅无法知道考生的姓名，就连考生的字迹也无从辨识，只能凭大卷情况来评判考生的水平高低，从而有效地降低了科场舞弊的可能性。
However, the would-be cheats were not so easily put off. After bribing the examiners, they would insert some special phrase or code into their answers to identify themselves. After the new rules about transcription came into effect, one royal scholar invited the candidates from his hometown to his house for a meal. After all the niceties and compliments were exchanged, the conversation turned to poetry. The scholar made a point of quoting from one particular ancient book and emphasizing an obscure phrase that meant, "To hell with it." When the papers came to be marked, all those who had used the phrase in their answers passed the examination. Of course, these secret codes could be used to help those who were deemed to deserve it. In 1892, two candidates, Zhang Jian and Liu Keyi, went to visit Wang Tonghe, a scholar from their home province. Wang Tonghe was the first-place candidate when he had taken the palace exam several decades previously. He became tutor to two of the young emperors and served in key posts for both finance and the military. Wang saw great promise in Zhang Jian. During their visit, the senior man spent a lot of time talking about current affairs and stressing the phrase overall strategy. Zhang took this for a normal discussion, but his comrade, Liu, committed it to heart. When Wang reviewed the examination papers and saw a phrase, overall strategies, he gave that paper the highest score. However, when the identity of the writer was revealed, it turned out to be Liu Keyi, not Zhang Jian.
张謇后来于光绪20年，也就是1894年考中状元，受翰林院修撰。辛亥革命时为清廷起草退位诏书，南京政府成立后任实业总长，后期官走上实业教育救国之路，是清末民初著名的实业家、政治家和教育家。
In 1823, on the eve of the metropolitan exams, the Ministry of Rights sent an urgent memorial to the Emperor Daoguang. It entreated him to allow the name of Zhu Bin to be struck from the approved list of candidates. It had been discovered that his name was on the list, but that his son Zhu Shiyan was now the chief examiner. Zhu Bin had tried and failed to pass the exam on many occasions over decades. But his son had passed with flying colors some 20 years before and was now a senior academician. It could only lead to suspicions of impropriety were Zhu Bin at long last to succeed. Hence, against all previous custom, came the request for permission to withdraw. To help create uniform and easily comparable answer papers, the Ming Dynasty saw the adoption of the 8-section or 8-legged essay as the standard answer format. The essay, composed of 8 sections, was, as the name suggests, an answer written in 8 strictly defined and formatted sections. Opening, amplification, preliminary exposition, initial argument, central argument, ladder argument, final argument, and conclusion. It required the writer to master not only logic, grammar, and rhetoric, but also meter and verse. The format had been invented by the great Northern Song scholar and reforming Vice Chancellor, Wang Ansha. The stylistic technique would take years to master. Supporters argued that the ability to write a good 8-legged essay did indeed mark a great talent. Opponents found it over-stylized and constricting. However, when it was abolished as a requirement in 1663, the emperor was forced to reinstate it 5 years later because of the protestations of the scholars who had spent so many years mastering its strictures.
正是一系列防备处事的款款相扣，有效遏制了科场腐败。可以说，科举防备制度正是在于作弊手段累次较量的过程中，得以不断成熟完善，而舞弊手段还是为应对日趋严密的防备处事，得以不断翻新，两者可谓相生相克。
And the exam administrators were not always above reproach either. In 1657 AD, 2 admission officers got together to sort out a little problem that had arisen. taken so many bribes from more than 1,000 candidates that they could not hope to pass them all. Finally, they decided to pass those who had paid the most and those who had the most powerful connections. When the results were announced, the list of successful candidates raised suspicions among the others who protested vigorously. The emperor ordered an investigation.
很快，案件便水落石出。受贿考官张国普、李正业和行贿举人田氏、邬竹林等等被处斩立决，没收家产；亲属共108人被流放。与此案有株连的官员也一并查处，这就是历史上有名的丁酉北围科场案。
6 months after Jiang and Li lost their heads in Beijing, another scandal erupted in southern China. Immediately after the results were announced, another batch of bribery allegations was made against the officials responsible. Arrests followed, and all the candidates were summoned to the capital, 800 miles to the north, to retake the exam. It was early the following year when the emperor, Shun Jia, personally presided over the exam for those candidates in the capital. The candidates were admitted to the hall under a heavy guard. Most were apprehensive, and not a few terrified. But one young man, Wu Zhaoqian, was indignant. Should I allow this impugning of my integrity just to pass the imperial examination, he asked? He threw down his brush and left the examination hall. The emperor was not amused, and Wu was lucky only to find himself exiled to the northeast, the Manchu homeland beyond the Great Wall.
这次复试结果证明，江南乡试确有造假，有20余人文理不同。顺治帝御史下令将主考官方友、钱爱忠等20人处以极刑，没收财产，枷锁流放黑龙江。作弊考生方章佑等人各取举人资格，杖责40大板，家人发配边疆。
Even if an official were not himself corrupt, the exam system would cost him his life. The year is 1733, and Yu Hongtu, the official in charge of provincial examination in Henan, is preparing to attend to his duties. Unbeknownst to him, his favorite and most devoted concubine, Min, has been scheming with other household servants to line their own pockets by selling copies of the exam papers in advance. A stream of candidates paid handsome sums for this telling advantage. Rumors began to spread that Yu Hongtu had been taking bribes. When these rumors reached the emperor, Yongzheng, he was apoplectic with rage. An investigation followed, which firmly placed the blame on Yu. The hapless official was condemned to death. But this was not just any execution. Yu was condemned to an exemplary execution, a slow death through bisection at the waist. As his torso lay dying on the ground, he stretched out his hand and wrote the character pitiful 7 times with his own blood. When the reports of this reached the emperor, Yongzheng was full of remorse, deciding, at least, that bisection should be banned as a method of execution thereafter.
从几大舞弊案中间可以看出，统治者对科场舞弊极为痛恨，并且成日严厉，逐渐王朝维护科技公平公正的巨大决心。但是，书中自有王金恶，书中自有颜如玉的社会价值取向，仍是一部分考生甘冒人头落地甚至满门抄载的风险，孤注一掷，铤而走险。
The Imperial examination was an acid test of failure and success. Open to all, those from wealthy backgrounds who could afford tutors, books, and above all, the luxury of full-time study, had a clear advantage. Even so, many failed the exams time and time again. Just or unjust, these failures could inflict great suffering and bitterness. In the autumn of 1688, a 48-year-old man called Pu Songling sat the provincial examination in Shandong. Inspired, he writes freely and fluently and has soon finished his first paper. But then he notices to his horror that in his haste, he has skipped a page on his answer sheet. This breach of strict format rules guarantees he will fail. No corrections are allowed. He can do nothing except sit and wait for the exam to end, knowing that he will be disqualified. Pu was never to pass the provincial exam, let alone the metropolitan or palace exams. But he is still famous in Asia and beyond as the author of the classic book of short stories, Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. Pu Songling was born into an impoverished gentry family in 1640. When he was 19, he came top in the local county exams, equivalent today of getting a first-class BA degree. He was never to pass again, though for much of his life he made a living as a tutor. Finally, at the age of 71, he was given a position at the Imperial Academy in honor of his literary prowess.
蒲松龄曾这样描绘自己落地时的居上心情：婚礼要废气传人，暴跳无舞；此事神色巨变，单联若石。此事耳朵之言，弄之以不觉也。形容落榜时自己的，就像众多之言，全然没有自觉。
Pu's stories mixed the naturalistic with the supernatural. In one, a poor scholar called Ye, who has failed the exam many times, falls desperately ill. A local official recognizes his talent and comes to comfort him, offering to fund his future studies. Unfortunately, Ye fails again, but when the official moves to the capital, Ye follows him. In the capital, he finally succeeds, and he returns home to his wife. When she sees him, she screams in terror and collapses. "Don't you recognize your husband?" he asks. "I buried my husband 3 years ago," she replies. In his desperation to succeed, the unhappy scholar has not realized that he was dead, and it was his ghost that had traveled to the capital. Pu Songling was a bitter critic of the exam system, in which he felt corruption thrived and creativity was suppressed. He might have gained satisfaction from knowing that his stories have long outlasted those exams and are still with people today in movies like Painted Skin and A Chinese Ghost Story.
蒲松龄不仅借此表达自己一生落魄、怀才不遇的辛酸经历，更是深刻地反映了落地士子内心的科举之痛。科举其实早已超越了生死，成为中国传统知识分子心中无法割舍的情结和挥之不去的隐痛。
But reaction against the exam system was not always limited to the literary. Until the ripeness of autumn fades, I'll crush every flower that blooms. My charging cohorts sack the capital, their golden armor put on in vain. This is the blood-curdling poetry of Wang Chao, who rebelled against the Tang dynasty in the late 9th century. Wang Chao was born to a wealthy salt-dealing family. He was both well-educated and skilled in the arts of war. But repeated failures in the Imperial examination, quite possibly because of his family's lowly social status, left him violently embittered against the Tang.
唐朝起义后，收养了不少失意文人，他们撰写行文，抨击朝廷昏聩黑暗，控诉科举压抑人才，为失意士人大鸣不平。黄巢起义引起了激烈的社会震荡，同时也进行统治层对科举取士制度进行反思和完善。
Nearly 1,000 years after Wang Chao, another disillusioned examination candidate nearly overturned the ruling Qing dynasty. In the 1840s, repeated exam failures led one young student from a Harka family in Guangdong to a nervous breakdown. In his delirium, he saw a man with a golden beard who soothed him and addressed him as my second son. Afterwards, the young man was introduced to the Bible by a Christian missionary, and then he understood his dream. He was the Son of God, Jesus Christ's younger brother. The young man Hong Cho Chuan started a cult. The cult attracted attention of the Qing government, which tried to suppress it. The cult revolted, and within a few short years, had most of South China under their control. The rebellion led by Hong lasted for more than 10 years and cost 20 million lives. As with Wang Chao, it left the ruling dynasty mortally wounded. The movement attracted many diverse supporters, not least among them other failed exam candidates, many of whom displayed extraordinary abilities in both the civil and military fields. Hong Cho Chuan even organized his own imperial exam system, and the kingdom he established were the first, and indeed only, regime to allow women to sit the exams.
黄巢、洪秀全等人的反叛，一方面有自身科场失意的成分，但更多的还是出于他们对理智腐败、社会黑暗的不满和反抗。尤其是洪秀全，当时鸦片盛行，朝廷腐败，民族矛盾空前激化，因此科场失意的他才会担当起反叛民众的代言人角色。
Since the imperial exam system had long been used to harness the ambitions of the educated classes in support of the state, it was important for the emperor to calm the anguish of those who had failed. Under the Qing, the system was developed to allow all those who had failed to receive their examination papers back within 10 days, complete with the examiner's remarks. If a candidate thought he had been treated unfairly, he could appeal to the Ministry of Rights. The Emperor Qianlong, when preparing for his 80th birthday in 1791, decided to appoint an academician in his 90s to lead the celebrations. However, there was no academician of any such age. So Qianlong found a 102-year-old scholar called Xie. Xie was a successful provincial examinee, but he had not progressed to the metropolitan, let alone the palace exams, to become a royal scholar at the Imperial Academy. Qianlong simply appointed Xie to the Imperial Academy, and then gave him a post in government.
乾隆帝对这位老寿星的一次次特恩加官，并非真的指望他干出什么实事来，而是为自己这个10千老人、花甲生平的皇帝增光添彩而已。这从中也可以看出朝廷对一些老业落榜巨士的特日恩宠。
The imperial examination could determine the fate of an individual and his descendants for many generations. It molded the orthodox thought of imperial China. But a system that acted so dramatically on mankind's aspirations, both as an accelerator and a brake, was also bound to give rise to significant discord.